By the end of this video, you are going to understand every single chord in Bach's Prelude in C major. You'll not only be able to name each chord, but also understand how each chord fits into the bigger progression. And on top of that, if you can understand all these chords here in Bach's Prelude in C major, you're going to be well on your way to understanding the harmony in any piece. Now, there are 3 easy things that you have to know for the rest of this video to make sense. So pay attention, because all the analysis we're going to do for the rest of this video is kind of built on these 3 concepts. The first one is that chords are built using every other letter name. So almost all the chords in Bach's Prelude in C, and really all the chords in all classical music, follow this principle. So a C chord has to go C, E, G, every other letter name. There's a C, you skip the letter D, E, skip the letter F, G. A G chord goes G, B, D. Now we'll come back to this concept throughout the video, but for right now, just remember chords, every other letter name. The next thing is that we are going to assign a number to each chord in this piece. Us musicians use these numbers to refer to chords all the time, and they are extremely helpful. And the good news is the basic concept is pretty simple. So let's say we're in the key of C. The key of C has no sharps or flats. It's just C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. The C chord is the 1 chord. So the first chord of the key of C is the C chord. In the key of C, D would be a 2 chord, because D is the second note of the key of C, C, D. If I told you to play a 5 chord in the key of C, you would have to play a G chord, because C, D, E, F, G. Oh, and by the way, we use Roman numerals to refer to the harmony because honestly, as musicians, we use normal numbers enough. We might say, hey, put your 2 finger on the 5th measure, on the 4th note, and hold it for 3 beats. We have numbers everywhere, so we use Roman numerals. So when you see a Roman numeral, you know that musician is talking about what position is that chord relative to the key. And the final thing you need to know before we analyze Bach's Prelude in C major is the easiest thing, and that's simply that 2 chords in this context, second chords, they really like to go to 5 chords, and 5 chords really like to go to 1 chords. 2 chords have this drive in classical music to get to a 5 chord, and 5 chords just have this drive to get back to the 1 chord, to get back home to our original chord. All right, let's jump into measure 1. Like basically every other measure in this piece, measure 1 has 2 notes in the left hand, and then 3 notes in the right hand that are played twice. We have to start out by figuring out what letter name to give this chord. So in the left hand, we have C and E. Then in the right hand, we have G, C, E. Now, whenever you are analyzing chords, anytime you're analyzing chords, if you see duplicate letter names, you can get rid of the duplicates. You don't need the duplicate. So there's 2 C's. We don't need to say this chord has 2 C's in it. It's just, it has a C in it. There are also 2 E's, so we don't need both E's. So really we end up with a C, an E, and a G. And before we call this a C chord, you have to ask ourselves, does this go every other letter name? We have a C, we have an E, and we have a G. Yes, this is some type of a C chord. Now what could happen is you do the exact same thing I just did, but you take out the duplicate C and E in the left hand, and you end up with G, C, and E. And you might be asking, does that change the chord? Is this a different chord now? And the answer is definitely not. The reason is G, C, E is not every other letter name. That can't be a chord every other letter name. There's a G, G, A, B. It can't be a G chord. That would be G, A, B, C. That's not every other. So what that means is if you ended up with this, G, C, E, you have an inverted chord. Inverted, basically a flipped around chord. You're going to take those letter names and scramble them until you end up with every other letter name. So for example, if you have G, C, E, you know that can't be right. So you could take the G and put it on top and go, oh, C, E, G, that's every other letter name. So this is some kind of a C chord. Now, what kind of C chord is it? Well, this is a C major chord, which you could figure out by saying, well, it's happy. Major chords are happy, but we kind of want a more concrete way to go about determining whether the chord is major or minor. So once you get your chord in the correct order, C, E, G, every other letter name, you can actually count the distance between the notes to figure out whether it is a major or minor chord. So if you go from the C, you're going to say how many half steps does it take to get to the next letter? C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. That's a total of 4 half steps. Then E to G, you have to go F, F sharp, G. So C, go up 4, and then go up 3 more. If you have that pattern, you start on a note, you go up 4 half steps, then you go up 3 more half steps, That is what makes a C major chord. And you can test this from anywhere. You can start from A flat, play A flat, go up 4 half steps, A, B flat, B, C, and then go up 3 more, D flat, D, E flat, and you would get an A flat major chord. Now that we know it's a C major chord, we have to ask ourselves, what Roman numeral is it? Now, you would think Bach, in Prelude in C, his very first prelude, would just start out with a 1 chord. That would be the most safe thing to do. You would expect him to say, hey, let's start out our Prelude in C with our home chord of 1. And if you thought that, you're actually exactly right. That's what he does. This is our 1 chord because it's Prelude in C. We're in the key of C major. There are no sharps and flats yet. And so in the key of C, our 1 chord, our very first chord, is C. So by saying it's a 1 chord, we're kind of saying this is our home base. That's what the whole point of this Roman numeral analysis is, to kind of learn that different numbers mean different things. So 1, that is home. That's our safe spot. So C, we're in the key of C, we're playing a C chord, we just feel nice and cozy right now. But don't worry, that won't last for long. Let's jump into measure 2. In measure 2, we have a C, D, A, D, and F. So first, just like measure 1, we have to figure out what to call this chord. So we have C, D, A, D, and F. Take out all duplicates. We don't need both D's, so we're left with C, D, A, and F. Now we're going to take these notes and kind of smush them into 1 octave altogether. We don't need to have all these random jumps. With that F on top, we can kind of move down. We can put in the order here, C, D, F, A. Now ask yourself the question, is this every other letter name? C, skip a letter, E. No, C cannot go on the bottom. So even though C is on the bottom of this chord, this can't be a C chord because we already know C is C, E, G. So we're going to have to flip this and try to figure out what is the actual letter name of this chord. So let's just flip it once. Let's hit the C off the bottom. We're going to put the C on top. We end up with D, F, A, C. And is that every other letter name? D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Perfect. This is some kind of a D chord. This is every other layer name. So we figured it out already. So this is some kind of a D chord because it's D, F, A, C. Our first goal is to take every chord, put them in an order of every other layer name. That's what we did, and now we know it's a D chord. But you might have noticed this is a 4-note chord. So for right now, let's ignore that C. We'll come back to that in a second. The first 3 notes here, D, F, A. Now you might notice if you have a good ear, this has a different sound than the first chord. This sounds more sad. This is a minor chord. But again, if you don't have the ear to hear that, let me tell you how to figure that out without just using your ear. You start on D. Remember, to make a major chord, we went a note up 4, then up 3 half steps. This is just the opposite. To make a minor chord, you start on any note, you go up 3 half steps, D sharp, E, F, then go up 4 half steps, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. So to make a minor chord, you start on a note, you go up 3 half steps, then you go up 4 more half steps. So this starts with D minor, but then there is this C on top. And that C is called a 7. Remember doing every other layer name? If D was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we call this a 7th chord because we're adding an extra note, a 4th note on top. But again, it's called 7th because we're doing every other layer. We have D, skip a layer, F, skip a layer, so it's 1, 3, 5, 7. In fact, you can refer to all the notes of your chord in that way. You can have the first note of the chord, the 3rd of the chord, the 5th of the chord, and the 7th of the chord. Again, I told you we use these Roman numerals because we have a lot of numbers in music, but those details aren't super important right now. You're going to get a lot of practice throughout this video in 7th chords. But for right now, we're talking about a D minor 7. So now, what is D minor in the key of C? Well, that is our 2 chord. First 2 measures together, we start out with a 1 chord. Nice, cozy home chord, and then we immediately go to 2-7. A more dissonant chord that has its note at the bottom. That's a little more distant. This is our 2 chord. We want to go to a 5 chord, so let's jump to measure 3 and see if it goes to a 5 chord. The notes of measure 3 are B, D, G, D, and F. Now we're going to go through this system every time, but we're going to get quicker as we go along here. So first of all, cut out any duplicates. We don't need the duplicates, so we have 2 Ds. We're going to get rid of one of the Ds. Now we're going to take the rest of these notes and kind of smush them into 1 octave. This F is way up here by itself. We're going to move the F down so everything's in the normal order. So right now we have B, D, F, and G. Now ask yourself, is this a B chord? Can I count every other letter from B? You have B, C, D, E, F, G, A. No, cannot be a B chord because F to G is only 1 letter. It has to be every other letter. So we're going to take this B off the bottom and put it on top and then ask yourself again, can this be a D chord? We have D, F, G. No, the F to G still doesn't work. It cannot be a kind of a D chord because F to G is not every other layer. So we're going to flip it again. Take the D off the bottom, put it on top. Is this an F chord? We have F, G. No, can't be an F chord either because F to G is not every other letter. So we're going to try again. Take the F off the bottom, put it on top, and see if this is some kind of a G chord. We have G, B, D, F. And that is it. It took all the iterations of inverting this chord to figure it out, but this is some kind of a G chord because from G, we can do every other letter name. Now, what kind of a G chord is this? Well, first of all, let's focus on the first three notes, G, B, D. This chord is a major chord, but again, if you don't want to rely on just hearing major or minor, you start from that G. You can go up 4 half steps. 4 half steps takes us to B, and then 3 more takes us to D. So this is a G major chord. If it would have been 3 then 4, that would have been our minor chord. But this is 4 then 3, so it's our major chord. And then once again, we have a 4th note on top. This F up here, so this is going to be called a G7 chord. So now that you know the letter name, let's figure out what Roman numeral to give it. So this is a G chord. In the key of C, we have C, D, E, F, G, which is the 5 chord. We're going to call this a 5-7 chord, which if you remember right, that's perfect. We had a 2 chord. 2 chords want to go to 5 chords. So Bach did it. He did it right. What a brilliant man, right? He got our 2 chord. It's supposed to go to a 5 chord, and it did. And now, if you remember from the beginning, 5 chords want to go to 1 chord. So we're going to look at measure 4, and hopefully we get a 1 chord. The notes of measure 4 are C, E, G, C, E. We take out all the duplicates, so we have 2 E's, we don't need both of them. We have 2 C's, we don't need both of them. So it's going to be left with C, E, and G. And if you remember right, that's actually the exact same notes we had in measure 1. So this is our C major chord. We have a C, an E, and a G. That's every other letter. It's C major because C, 4 half steps up, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and then 3 more half steps up, F, F sharp, G. We have a C major chord, and our C major chord is our 1 chord in the key of C. So we made it. We played a 1 chord, which can do anything it wants to. That's our home key. We did a 2 chord, which really wanted to go to 5, especially the 2-7. It went to 5. It went to a 5-7, which was a little harsher. That 5 really wants to go to 1, and it did it. And that is your first musical progression. It's not the whole piece, but here's a little tiny cell. This is what we actually call a chord progression. Chord progressions are things that happen that once they're sort of set in motion, they roll off one to the next. So you just heard, if you've never heard this before, this is a chord progression. We have a 1 chord. We went to our 2 chord. Now the 2 chord, we can't stop there. What if you just ended the piece? You can't, right? It needs to keep going. It needs to go to that 5 chord. Ooh, now that really needs to go to a 1 chord, right? And that is our progression. That's what we call it, a progression. Things go from one to the next. We get 1, 2, 5, 1. Actually, in lots of styles of music, 1, 2, 5, 1 is one of the most common chord progressions we'll see. We'll actually see more of that later in this piece. Now, quick interpretation note, you notice how I crescendoed. I got louder driving to that 5 chord because the 5 chord is kind of the peak. Then after the 5-7 chord, I resolved. I came down. I went back to the 1 chord, back to the C chord, and kind of let it, the volume die away because that's our home. We had a progression. We got really far away. We got to our 5 chord, and then we resolved back to the 1 chord. All right, measure 5, something brand new happens. We have C, E again, but then A, E, A. So once again, cut out the duplicates. We don't need 2 A's. We only have 1 A. Cut out the extra E. We have C, E, A. Now, we already know by this point this can't be a C chord because C chords are C, E, G. So we're going to have to flip this to find basically a flipping of the chord that's every other layer name. So let's flip it once. Is it an E chord? E, A, no. E to A is not every other layer. So we're going to flip it again. A, C, E, and that is our normal order. A, B, C, D, E, every other letter. So this is some kind of an A chord. Now, what kind of A chord is it? You can use your ear, and here it's an A minor, but also if you want to figure it out, start from the A. How many half steps does it take to get to C? 3, and then how many till the E? So 3, then 4, this is going to be our minor chord, so A minor. Now what is A minor in the key of C? Well, we have C, D, E, F, G, A. So this is our 6th chord. Now the 6th chord is a really cool chord because it's not like the 1 chord. It's not like we're totally home and safe. It's not like the 2 and the 5 chord that really have a clear direction. The 6th chord is kind of a waiting chord. When you hear it, you don't know exactly what's going to happen next because it doesn't have this clear direction where, well, now we heard this chord, it has to go to this chord. It's just like, okay, here's like a minor chord that kind of feels somewhat homey, kind of like the home key, but not quite all the way there. So 6th chords are just sort of in the middle, kind of lying in waiting chords. We're not quite sure what's going to happen next. So speaking of what does happen next, measure 6, we have our first kind of shocker because our first accidental. It's the first note that's sharp or flat that goes outside of the key of C. So our notes are C, D, F sharp, A, D. Just like before, we want to figure out what to call this chord first. So C, D, F sharp, A, D. We're going to take out the extra D. We don't need it, so we're just going to be left with C, D, F sharp, A. Then we're going to flip this chord until we find in every other letter names with the C on top. With the C on top, we have D, F sharp, A, C. Don't let this sharp throw you. You can actually just leave the sharp out right now and just say, is that every other letter name? Yes, it is. D, F, A, C. It could be D, F sharp, A, C. It could be D, F, A flat, C. It could be D, F, A flat, C flat. If it's every other layer name, then yes, this is some kind of a D chord. Now, what kind of D chord is it? Well, it's D, go up 4 half steps to get to F sharp, and then 3 more half steps to get to A. So this is actually a D major chord with our extra note on top, our 7th chord. So we're going to call this a D7. In fact, it sounds a lot like our G7 from earlier, just a different one. This is D7. Now we haven't talked about it much yet, but these 7 chords are really, really special. Not so much the minor 7, but just the straight up 7, the G7 or the D7 are really special because they are basically always 5 chords. I just called this D7 a 5 chord, but you've been paying attention and you know that D is a 2 chord in the key of C. So how can this be a 5 chord? So if I completely threw you for a whirl, let me explain myself. You see, in classical music, pieces hardly ever stay in one key. They're going to start in a key, they're going to get back to that original key in the end, but in the middle, they're going to travel to new keys. And these 5 chords are like the best way to do that. So you hear a 7 chord, like D7, our ears automatically hear that's the 5 chord that wants to go to a 1 chord. I could play any 5 chord. I could do this 5 chord here, and you want that to go to this 1 chord. You don't even know what 5 chord that is, but you want to go there because our ear, those 5 chords want to go there. And when you play a 7, D7, G7, A flat 7, E7, whatever it is, our ears hear that as a 5 chord. So this D7, we're going to hear as a 5 chord. So what we have to ask ourselves now is D7 is the 5 of which key? So we're going to have to do some backwards counting to get there. So we're saying D is the 5 chord. If you don't believe me, just take my word for it for right now. D is the 5 chord of what key? Well, D is 5, C is 4, B is 3, A is 2, G is 1. So D is the 5th chord of the key of G. And that will always be true. The key of G, the 5th chord will be D. So what that means for us is that when we hear this D7 chord, we're not going to call this some kind of a 2 chord. But we're going to recognize the fact that we are moving to a new key. So we're going to call this a 5 chord. But in order to do that, we have to make sure everyone's aware that was not a 5 of the key of C. This is 5 in our new key. This is 5 in the key of G. So now after all that, we really hope we go to a G chord. So let's check out the next measure here. We have a B, a D, G, D, G. Take out the duplicates. We don't need 2 Gs. We don't need 2 Ds, we're left with B, D, G. Let's flip it to a normal order. The normal order would be G, B, D, every other letter name, G, B, D. And yes, that is a G chord. So this G chord used to be the 5 chord in the key of C. This is where the Roman numeral analysis can throw some people. The G chord we called a 5 chord earlier in this piece. But now that we've set it up and kind of introduced it as the main chord, this G chord is now our 1 chord because now we're actually in the key of G. Now, if I haven't completely blown your mind yet, I'm going to show you something really, really cool. Let's back up a couple chords to that A minor. When we had the A minor, I told you it was a 6th chord, and I knew this was coming, but for you, I just said it's a 6th chord. It's an interesting chord because it doesn't really have a clear direction. We don't know exactly what it is yet. But let's pretend for a second that we knew we were going to the key of G. We knew we were eventually going to do a 5 chord and a 1 chord. Well, let's ask ourselves, what is A minor in the key of G? Well, in the key of G, in that context, if our scale was G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A is actually our 2 chord. So that A could be a 6th chord in the key of C, but it could also be a 2 chord in the key of G. And if it is a 2 chord in the key of G, where do 2 chords want to go? Well, they want to go to 5 chords. So this A will want to go to the 5 of the key of G, which is our D7, which then wants to go to our 1 chord in the key of G, which is our G chord. So this A minor chord is actually called a pivot chord. If you pivot on something, it means you can kind of hinge on one area. This is called a pivot chord. This chord makes sense in the old key. In the key of C, this was our 6th chord. Makes perfect sense. It's just a 6th chord. In the key of G, it's a 2 chord. That is exactly what a 2 chord should do. It goes 2, 5, 1. So this A minor fits in both contexts, and that's what a pivot chord is. A pivot chord is a chord that helps you change keys by making sense, by working out in both the old key and the new key. So if you want to know the proper way to analyze this chord, you would call this a 6th chord. Then you put this interesting little ch in the middle, then say it's a 2 chord as well. It's a 6th chord, but it's also a 2 chord in the new key. And then from that point forward, we're going to analyze this as it's the key of G. So we're like, yes, it's a 6th chord in the key of C, but A minor is also 2 in the key of G. And then now we're going to analyze everything as if it's the key of G. We go to a 5 chord in the key of G, 5, 7. Then we go to our 1 chord in the key of G. On the measure 8, we have the notes B, C, E, G, C. Once again, we're going to cut out all the duplicates. We're left with B, C, E, G. Then we're going to flip this chord until we find every other layer name, which is going to be C, E, G, B. So C, E, G we should recognize as our C chord. So we start with a C major chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. But then we're putting an extra note on top, that's 7th note, and it's a B. Now, in the scope of this video, I don't want to get too into this, but this 7th chord is different than our other 7th chord earlier. Just know for right now, it's not the same kind of 7th chord. Listen to the sound first of all. This one sounds like this. The one earlier sounded like this. Now, if you want to know the reason they're different is because we have a C major chord. That's true in both of these 7th chords. But in this one, the 7th note is as close as we can get to an octave without actually being an octave. So this is a B on top. It's almost a C. It's 1/2 step below C. So we call this a major 7th. This is a C major, big M 7 chord, C major 7. If it was just a C7, like the D7 and the G7 we had earlier, we would have a B flat. Okay, I said we weren't going to get into it, but let's get into it a little bit because I promised to analyze every chord for you. So back up to our G7 chord, G7, G, B, D, F. We had that one earlier. If this would have been an F sharp, it's a major 7th chord. Our D7 earlier was D, F sharp, A, C. This C can actually get closer to the D without being D. It could be C sharp. That would be a D major 7th chord. They have totally different functions in classical music. When you're analyzing harmony, these are not 5 chords. When you hear our other 7 chords, it's our D7, G7. Those are our 5 chords. You hear them and your ear says, boom, 5 chords, I want to resolve to 1. That's not true with this chord. This chord does not automatically want to resolve down to 1. It could be actually a couple different chords. It depends on the context. So it doesn't have this strong connotation like our 5-7 chord, that just normal G7 chords like, oh, that has to go to 1 because it only fits in one spot. This chord can be a couple different things. So it's a beautiful chord. It's actually my personal favorite chord in music, my favorite sound. But it doesn't have that same, this has to be a 5 chord. So we have to figure out what this chord is. So we already said the notes make a C major 7 chord. Now, if you're not paying attention, you might say, cool, that's a 1-7 chord. But it's actually not, because remember, we're in the key of G now. So in the key of G, what is C? G, A, B, C. This is our 4 chord. This is our 4-7 chord. It's a 4 chord with a major 7 put on top, and that's the B there. Now after this 4 chord, we're kind of wondering where Bach is going to go next. 4 is not like the 1 chord. It's also not the 2 or the 5. They kind of have direction. It's, again, one of these chords, it's like, it's kind of up in the air. We can go a few different places. So let's look at measure 9 and see what he does. Here we have A, C, E, G, C. We're going to cut out the duplicates. We don't need two C's. We're left with A, C, E, G. Then we say, is that every other layer name? Yes, every other layer name, A, C, E, G. So this is some kind of an A chord. As always, we're going to look at the first three notes first. Here's an A. We go 3 half steps to get to C, 4 half steps to get to E. So this is an A minor chord. And then we have that 7th note on top. And this is a minor chord. So we're going to call this an A minor 7. Now remember, we're in the key of G. We're not in the key of C anymore. So in the key of G, what is our A minor? 2. This is our 2-7 chord. And 2-7 wants to go to 5. And in fact, we've had a 2-7 before. The second chord of this entire piece was a 2-7 chord. So let's see if we go to the right place. The next measure we have D, A, D, F sharp, C. We don't need two Ds, we just have one D in there. We're going to take all these notes and kind of squish them into one octave together. Let's say we have A, C, D, F sharp. Now, you might not be getting there, but eventually you get pretty quick at putting this in the normal order. So I can see that the D and the C are next to each other. That's not every other layer name. It can't be. So we're going to flip this to an order where we can have every other layer name, which is going to be D, F sharp, A, and C. That's every other letter. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C. And so we have some kind of a D chord. As always, what kind of D chord do we have? Look at the first three notes. D, 4 up, and then 3 more up is A. So this is going to be a D major chord because it was 4 half steps and then 3 more half steps. Then we have our 7 on top. Now, if you want to distinguish which 7th do we have, you could use your ear, but it's going to take you probably a while to hear the difference between those two 7th chords. So you can ask yourself, is this 7th as close as I can get to D without being D? No, I'm on a C here. I could do C sharp. And that would be our D major 7. This is just D7, good old D7. We have our C here on top. It's not C sharp, so we have a D major chord with a 7 on top. We call this chord D7. Now D7, as you already know, in the key of G, G, A, B, C, D. This is our 5 chord. This is our 5-7 chord, which is perfect because we were just on a 2 chord. 2 chords want to go to 5 chord. We just said A minor 7. It's going to go to D7, and now we really hope we go to a 1 chord because that's what should follow after a 5 chord. Our very next chord is G, B, D, G, B. We cut out all the duplicates. We don't need 2 Gs. We don't need 2 Bs. We're left with G, B, D. That's already in normal order, and it is a G major chord, just like the G major chord we had earlier. And that in the key of G is a 1 chord. Okay, I want you to take a few deep breaths for a second, and we're going to synthesize all the information we just now learned. We're going to talk about what are some of the progressions. You're going to find out that there really has only been one progression so far. We start out with 1, 2, 5, 1 in the key of C. 1, 2, 5, 1. And then we went to this pivot chord. This is our kind of question mark chord where we're like, ooh, what is this? This is a 6th chord, we think. But as we learn, this 6th chord was actually a pivot chord. It was actually a 2 chord. So really we just went 2, 5, 1 now in the key of G. This is another progression, just a 2, 5, 1, our most normal progression. 2 chord, 5 chord, 1 chord. And then the very next thing we do is we play a little 4 chord here for a second. Now this 4 chord, again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen next. It could go to a 1 chord, though in this context, it can't really go to a 1 chord. It could go to a 5 chord. It could go to a 2 chord. Well, Bach takes it to a 2 chord, 2-7, which then goes to our 5 chord, 2, 5, 1. So really this entire piece so far has been 1, 2, 5, 1, change keys, 2, 5, 1, stay in the new key, 4, 2, 5, 1. So 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 4, 2, 5, 1. You notice a pattern here. Bach is able to use the same basic progression, 2, 5, 1, 2 chords, want to go to 5 chords, and which want to go 1 chord, and make an entire first third of the piece out of just that 1 chord progression. Now the next thing Bach is going to do is he's going to get us back to our home key, which is what we kind of expect pieces to do. We kind of have a key, we might move away from it, and then eventually we're kind of like, hey, we're going to make it back home, right? We're going to get back to our original, not one chord, which is our G, but we want to get back to our original one chord. But the way Bach does this is pretty interesting. It introduces one of the more shocking chords we've heard so far, which I played loud on purpose. It is a pretty jarring chord here. We're going to learn a little theory to get what's going on in this chord, but before I tell you what that is, the way he's going to get back to our one chord is by means of a sequence. A sequence is just a repeating pattern in music, and you could keep doing it potentially forever until you ran out of notes. All he's going to do is introduce this kind of weird chord, which actually isn't that weird at all in classical context, but he's going to introduce this kind of shocking chord, then resolve it, and just move everything down. Shocking chord, resolve it. And then he's going to do that until we end up back in the key of C. So before we look at the next chord, I'm going to introduce you to a good old friend, or maybe a brand new friend for you, called a fully diminished seventh chord. Fully diminished seventh chords are so common in classical music because they're kind of like composer cheat codes, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But how to make a fully diminished seventh chord is really simple. You can play any note. I'm going to play a C. You go up 3 half steps, 3 notes. This is an E flat. We're going to go up 3 more notes. We're going to call this one a G flat. We're going to go up 3 more notes, which we'll call an A for right now. We'll get into more details here in a second, but we went up every 3rd note. And in fact, if you went up 3 more notes, you would make it back to C. So actually the fully diminished seventh chord is one of our few symmetrical chords in music. It's symmetrical because you can keep going up 3 forever. C, up 3, up 3, up 3, up 3, back to C, up 3, back to our E flat, up 3, back to our G flat. Now we've talked about how 2 chords want to go 5 chords and 5 chords want to go 1 chord, but a fully diminished seventh chord really wants to go somewhere. It wants to resolve the root of the chord, whatever letter name that chord is called. It wants to resolve up by half step. It wants to go to the very next letter name higher from that root of the chord. So if you were playing a C, fully diminished seventh chord, that C wants to go up to D flat. If you were playing an E, fully diminished seventh chord, that E wants to go up to F. Now, I told you they were like cheat codes. The reason is that because they're symmetrical, you can't necessarily know when you hear them which one you're hearing. You don't actually know which of these notes is the bottom note just by hearing it, and not even by seeing on the piano. I could say this was a C. I could also say this was a D sharp. I could say it was an F sharp. I could say it was an A. You don't actually know which one I'm playing, again, just by looking at. The only way you can know is to see how the composer actually spelled it in the music itself. And this is actually an interesting topic, which is spelling matters. We had a D major chord earlier, D, F sharp, A. You notice Bach didn't call it D, G flat, A. That would be wrong. Now, some people would say, well, G flat and F sharp is the same note, but Bach would never spell it that way because every other letter name, D, F, A, D, F sharp, A. You wouldn't say G flat, and there's lots of reasons, which would make this video like 20 minutes longer if I explain them all to you right now, so we're not going to get into it, but just know that composers care how they spell this stuff. For the most part, they're going to spell them accurately. Okay, are you ready for the cool sequence? So measure 12, we have a G, B flat, E, G, F sharp. We're going to cut out the duplicates. We don't need 2 Gs. We're going to take all these notes and put them into one octave together. So we have G, B flat, C sharp, and E. Now again, looking at the piano here, I can't necessarily see which chord this is, but if you look at the letter names, you can see that B and C are next to each other. That's not okay. So we're going to flip it. B flat, C sharp, E, G. That's still not okay because of B flat and C sharp. It looks far apart on the piano, but those 2 layers are by each other. Every other layer name. So we're going to flip it again. C sharp, E, G, B flat. And that is every other layer name. Now I know some of you are thinking it doesn't matter. It's symmetrical. And all I have to say, again, without getting into a huge discussion, is composers care. They spell this stuff the right way. Composers are very, very careful to make sure these letters are all spelled the correct way. So they will flip these diminished seventh chord really accurately, all except a weird exception here we'll talk about in a little bit. So if this is a C sharp fully diminished seventh chord, I told you that root of the chord, the C sharp, wants to resolve up by half step. So this C sharp wants to go to D. So let's look at the next measure and see if it actually goes to D. So the next measure we have F, A, D, A, D. We take out the duplicates, we only need one D, we only need one A. We're going to flip this F, A, D until we get to a normal order, which is D, F, A, which is a D chord, and it's in fact a D minor chord. So our C sharp fully diminished 7 actually went to D minor. C sharp fully diminished 7 wants to go to D. And there it is. Now the very next chord we get is this. We have F, A flat, D, F, B. So we put all that into one octave and then again flip it until we get to a normal order. We're going to find this is a B fully diminished 7th chord. Again, we know it's not a D, it's a B because B, D, F, A flat. That's how the every other layer name works. In a B fully diminished 7th chord, the B wants to resolve up to a C. So the next measure here we have E, G, C, G, C, which we should be really comfortable with this chord by now. We put everything into one octave, we get C, E, G, and that in fact is a C chord. So what we just now did for measures 12 to 15 is Bach introduced fully diminished 7th chords. They need to resolve up. Then he marched down to the next one, resolved up, and then at that point he can stop because he made it back to the key of C. So literally all he's doing is saying, let's start this pattern, this sequence, where it's going to keep doing this sequence until we make it back to our home key. For that reason, it's not actually super helpful to put these Roman numerals on these intermittent chords. The fully diminished 7th chords, we just say this of the next chord. So it's going to this next chord. Now it goes to D minor, which in the key of G, D minor is 5, but it's kind of a weird 5 chord because minor 5 doesn't really happen that often. In the key of C, it's a 2 chord, but it doesn't really go to a 5 chord. Well, that's because when you're in the middle of a sequence, the chords don't matter as much. As weird as that sounds, the Roman numerals don't matter. When you do stuff like this, the composers aren't as concerned about what the letter or what the Roman numeral analysis will be or what their function is. They're like, no, we've entered a sequence. We're just going to play out this sequence until we get to the end. And we get to the end and we get back to a C chord. And the good news is we are back to a 1 chord now. So we made it back to our original key. So measure 15, C major chord, 1 chord in the key of C. From there, our next chord is E, F, A, C, F. We take out our duplicates. We don't need 2 Fs. We're left with E, F, A, C. We're going to put this in normal order. So this is some kind of an F chord. Look at the first 3 notes, F, A, C. What kind of an F chord is it? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It's an F major chord. But then we have that extra note on top, which is our 7th, but which 7 is it? Is it our F7 chord or is it our F major 7th chord? Well, this E is the very next note before we get to an octave. It's right below F. So this is actually our F major 7. E flat would be our F7 chord, but this is F major 7. The Roman numeral be C, D, E, F. That's our 4 chord. Remember earlier, we actually had a 4-7 chord like this, and I said we don't know exactly where it's going to go, right? It's not a 2 chord, it's not a 5 chord that has to go somewhere, so let's kind of see what Bach does next. So up next, we get this D, F, A, C, F. We cut out our duplicates, we're left with D, F, A, C. That is a normal order, so we say, what are the first 3 notes? D, F, A, that's going to be our D minor chord, which we've seen several times now. We actually have a C on top. So this is going to be a D minor 7. So we say, okay, D minor 7 in the key of C, that is our 2 chord. This is a 2-7 chord again. This is starting to look a little familiar. So on to measure 18, we're really hoping we get a 5 chord right now, which in the key of C would be a G chord. So our notes are G, D, and then G, B, F. So we cut out our duplicates. We don't need 2 Gs. We take all these notes and put them into 1 octave and we get G, B, D, F, which there you go. There's our G7 chord. We saw this one earlier, but just to review real quick, that's every little layer name. The first 3 notes, G, B, D, is G major because 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And the 7 on top is just our G7. It's not the major 7, that would be F sharp. That's right before G. This is just our G7 chord, which is our 5-7 chord in the key of C. So now hopefully Bach has established we're going home. So our next chord should be a 1 chord, and it is. It's C, E, G, C, E. So it's actually our original chord of the piece, just an octave lower, but now Bach is like, we made it back home. We started out in the key of C, we did 1, 2, 5, 1, and then we did 2, 5, 1, 4, 2, 5, 1 in a weird key in the key of 5. We did our kind of sequencing with the fully diminished seventh chords, and now Bach is like established. We are back home. We're in the key of C. We just did another 4, 2, 5, 1 in the key of C. But it is at this point that Bach is really going to start messing with us. In a way, the piece could be over. Like, he could end the piece right now. We've set out what we tried to do. We were like, we want to have a piece that at least goes to a new key and comes back. And he did a progression, 1, 2, 5, 1 in the original key. He did it twice in the new key. He did a sequence to get us back home. And then when we got to the home key, we did the 2, 5, 1 again in the original key. So we've kind of done our progression, actually the same progression. It didn't have to be the same progression, but in this piece, the same 2, 5, 1, home key, key of 5, back to home key. So he could really kind of end it right now. He could just... And we could all go home, right? We've arrived. But like I said, this is where Bach is going to really start messing with us, because our very next measure introduces a shocking note. We get C, G, B flat, A, E. Sorry, C, E. C, G, B flat, C, E. So just in context here, we've heard this, 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 and this, and then this. And that one really doesn't belong. So let's put these chords in order here. We have C, G, B flat, C, E. Leave out the C's because it's a duplicate. Put this all into one octave, and we get C, E, G, B flat. That is a normal order. That's every other letter, C, E, G, B flat. The first 3 notes we should know by this point is a C major chord, but then we get a B flat on top. Now earlier we had a C major 7 chord, C major 7. Remember in the key of G it was our 4/7 chord, so C major 7. This is actually C7 because it's B flat. It's not B natural, it's B flat. So this is just our C7 chord. Remember, when you have a 7 chord like C7, we assume with our ears that's a 5 chord. Well, we finally made to the key of C. Then he turns the C chord into a 5 chord. So we finally made it home, and Bach is like, no, the home key is now the 5 chord. So this is a C7 chord, which we assume is a 5 chord. So if we count backward and say, okay, C is the 5 of what key? C, B flat, A, G, F. So we finally made to the key of C, and now Bach is like, we're gonna play the 5 chord of the key of F. So this chord would be written 5/7 of F. Now where do we go next? In measure 21, we have FF, which is what we expected, A, C, E. The E is a little unexpected. We should have really done this. Instead we go, it's almost like Bach is like, we're not really going to go to the key of F, okay? That was just like a temporary little shocker, gotcha, just that one little B flat, and we'll go back to the key of C real soon here. So this F chord, we could interpret as the 1 chord in the key of F. It's actually an F major 7 chord. We could say this is the 1 chord in the key of F, or you could say it's the 4 chord in the key of C. This is actually where analysis can be flexible. There will be some people who will say we had a key change, and this is 1, the key of F. You could also interpret this as, no, we just had that one little 5 chord of F, that C7 chord, took us to F, but it's still a 4 chord. We haven't actually changed keys. And I would say for this level we're talking about, it doesn't matter. Either way, the C7 took us to F. The F in the larger context is the 4 chord. So it doesn't matter too much what you analyze it as is right now. We're just going to call this F chord a 4 major 7th chord to put something on the screen, but it doesn't matter that much. You call it what you want. So we're just kind of saying, 5 of F, but that doesn't really last that long. And Bach is like, just kidding, we'll go back to the key of C. So here's our 4/7 chord. And now we're kind of thinking, okay, we're going to a 2 chord again. So we went to a few 2 chords from 4/7 earlier. We could go to a 5 chord. Well, the next chord here is a real shocker. So remember your new friend you met earlier, the fully diminished 7th chord? We have another one right here. We have F sharp C, A, C, E flat. We're going to put all that together there into one octave. And the way Bach has spelled this is an F sharp fully diminished 7th. We know it's fully diminished 7th because it's symmetrical. We're going to F sharp, up 3 is A, up 3 more is C, up 3 more is E flat. If we went up 3 more, we get back to our F sharp. We know it's F sharp because that's the only way to spell it, where it's every other letter name. So what is F sharp doing? Well, I told you these fully diminished 7th chords, the root of the chord, the F sharp, wants to resolve up by half steps. So this F sharp really wants to go to G. Now, maybe you already know it's coming up next here, but if you don't, this is actually good. This is good news. We really want to get to our G chord because what does G do? G's are 5. We really want to get to 5 because we kind of got to C finally. Then Bach took us for a whirl. We went to like an F chord, which is weird. But if we can make it back to 5, we can have a strong 5 chord. We can like make that 5 chord resolve to a 1 chord and everything can be okay. So we're like, okay, cool, it's F sharp. Yeah, this is going to go to a G chord. And then Bach does something that isn't just like a little shocking, but he does something that is really rare even for him to do. Up next here we have A flat F, B, C, D. And this is a measure that a lot of people have been confused by and have struggled with for hundreds of years. So much so, there are versions of this piece that add in a measure before this chord to try to make this make more sense because it's such a shocking kind of out of nowhere chord. Some people are like, well, Bach must have messed up. And so they add an extra measure there. So we're not going to go with the assumption Bach messed up, but it is a shocking chord. Just so you know that C isn't actually one of the chord tones. I know it sounds weird. We haven't had this happen once. This is actually really common, but in this piece here, we haven't had to do this yet. Not every single note is always part of the chord. You could play a C chord and do this. And those D's were not part of the C chord, even though I played them. So in this context, we have a chord. The C isn't really part of the chord. We take the rest of these notes and put them together. We have A flat, B, D, and F. If we were to put that in a normal order, we would have B, D, F, A flat. That would be every other layer name. So this is a B fully diminished 7th chord, which is good. We're getting really used to these fully diminished 7th chords, but that's kind of wrong, right? We already had an F sharp fully diminished 7th chord, and that F sharp should have resolved to G, but it didn't. Now we have a B fully diminished 7th chord, which should resolve to C. So like I said, these two chords have been a matter of debate for a long time. There's actually some additions. You might own one that inserts a measure right here to try to make sense of this, but let me try to make sense of the way Bach actually wrote it. So there's this F sharp, it really wants to go to G. Well, if you just listen to the bass, F sharp, the next chord is A flat, that wants to take us to G actually. That harsh interval down there drags it back down to G. So actually the way Bach wrote it, if you look at the piece, horizontally, if you're looking at it this way, not necessarily the chords up and down, but this way, the bass actually does what we expect the bass to do. It just, instead of going right to G, it goes here first. Now the chord itself is kind of weird because it also plays that B fully diminished 7th chord, but B fully diminished 7th wants to go to C, and eventually we will get back to C. So this is kind of like an anticipation. It's not going to happen right away, but we are going to get to C. So it's kind of a dual purpose chord. He kind of has his F sharp fully diminished 7th chord, needs to go to G. It will go to G in just a second. Then we have a B fully diminished 7th chord, which needs to go to C, and it will eventually get to C. We're starting to build up the tension of returning to C. So you can make sense of this chord. Not saying it's easy, but you can make sense of this chord without throwing an extra measure in there. And besides that, the extra measure sounds atrocious, so please don't play the extra measure if your edition has one there. Now after these two crazy chords, Bach is going to kick off the final push to the end. He's going to kind of start the beginning of the end. This is going to be one last huge buildup to take us to the end of the piece. So at measure 24, Bach is going to go to a G. Now that doesn't seem that significant because I told you G was going to come up next because the F sharp fully diminished 7th chord should be followed by G. So the G in itself isn't shocking. The thing that's shocking is the G is the lowest note. And before we look at the details, just look at the measure 25. The next measure 25 also has G as the lowest note. So does 26. So does 27 and 28. So for the next 8 measures, actually, Bach is going to keep G as the lowest note. Now G is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the key of C. This is our 5th note, often the bottom of the 5th chord, right, in the key of C. This is a technique called standing on the dominant, standing on the 5 chord. Now this is not new if you know classical music. A lot of pieces do this. The idea is that you're going to get to that 5th note, the 5 that takes you back to C, and you're going to get stuck on there. And you're going to do different chords on top. The right hand's going to change to different chords. But in the midst of all these chord changes, keep in mind, this is all really 5. It's all really a 5 chord building up to a 1. So you can do this, this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, that is like in the larger context, it's really a G. That G is the driving factor of the next 8 measures. So from an analysis point of view, I'm going to tell you what the chords are and what the Roman numerals are, but really the best Roman numeral for the next 8 measure is just 5. That is the function. That's the harmonic progression that's going on here. It's just a whole lot of 5 chord. Different things will happen on top, but the next 8 measures is just all about 5. One huge buildup of 5 trying to get back to 1. Okay, so let's get into the details here. Measure 24, G, F, G, B, D. Well, take out the duplicates. This is just our G7 chord. It is not shocking because the next 8 measures are going to be all about a G chord. So we start out with the G7 chord. Should resolve, that's a 5 chord, should resolve to a 1 chord, a C chord, right? It goes to C, E, G, which is a 1 chord, but did I lie? I told you it's all G chord. Well, this G is still stuck on the bottom. Even though it's a C chord, we still have this G on the bottom. So yeah, we went to a C chord, but really it's all about this G chord. Then we're going to go here. This is the only chord in the whole piece that breaks the rule I told you earlier of every other letter name. If you were to take this next chord and try to put it in order, you're going to have G, C, D, F. There's no way to get G, C, D, F in a normal every other note order. I told you almost all the time, right? That's why I said almost, because there are some exceptions. If you are a pop musician, this is not a weird chord at all. This is just G suspended with a 7 on top. G suspended happens all the time in the pop music realm. Basically, the idea of a suspended chord is you take the second note, G, B, and you push that B up 1 note to a C, and that note really wants to go to a B eventually, but right now it's just been kind of suspended, it's been stuck. It happens in classical music, it happens in pop music. It's just, again, normally every other layer name, it's not going to work here. So the name for this chord is G sus, G suspended, with a 7 on top. But again, in the larger context, we're just still hanging out on this G down here. Measure 27, we get another straight up G chord. So that suspension, that suspended note, the C, got resolved down to a B. But again, it's a G7 chord, so we're still in a 5 chord. Measure 28 might be the most shocking, ugly chord of the whole piece, because we have technically an E flat, A, C, F sharp. If you put all that together, that's an F sharp, fully diminished 7th chord. F sharp, fully diminished 7, F sharp, A, C, E flat, wants to go to G, but Bach just leaves the G in the bass. So this chord here wants to go here, and he just puts them all together into one big chord. So again, even though the right hand and the upper notes are changing stuff, it's really all about this G. So this here wants to go to G, and it does go to G on the bottom. The top chord here, this chord here is G, E, G, C, G. So if we take out the duplicates, we're back to a C chord here, normal C chord, but once again, the G is on the bottom. So this is really all about that G chord. I'm going to have to say this 2 more times, measure 30, even though it's a weird chord that goes G, C, D, F. This is our G suspended again. It's still just our 5 chord. And then that C will resolve once again down to a B, which is just going to be our G7 chord, which is just our 5 chord. I burned through those 8 measures really quickly because that's the best way to think about this from an analysis point of view. Yes, there's some chromaticism with that F sharp. Yes, there's some different sounds going on, but this is all a massive 5 chord. And you think about the context of this piece, for the most part, our harmonic rhythm or the speed of the harmony has been once a measure. We do 1 chord, 2 chord, 5 chord, 1 chord, 4 chord, 2 chord, 5 chord, kind of once per measure. Then we get here and we get 5 chord, different type of 5 chord, different type of 5 chord, 5 chord, different type of 5 chord for 8 straight measures. That's what makes standing on the dominant, standing on the 5, like standing like you're planted, you're not going to move, you're stuck on this chord. That's what makes it so effective. So again, instead of getting into all the details, I'm just going to play it for you and listen to how this build keeps that 5 in the bass the whole time. And as the notes change, you still feel that just growing 5 chord the whole time. After all of that, we have 8 measures of 5. We really are ready for our 1 chord. And at this point, Bach is like, okay, I've done my trick. You know, I have my weird F sharp fully diminished 7 going to B fully diminished 7, which is delayed the resolution of the G. When you got to that G, you got stuck on for 8 measures. So now I'm really, really, really ready to end the piece. We are ready for our C chord. And here, once again, 4 measures from the end, Bach has one last trick up his sleeve where he says, you know what, remember that B flat we threw in there earlier where we played a C7 chord where our C chord became like the 5 of F? I like that. I actually liked it a lot. I liked it so much that after we did that, I took you through 8 measures of G, a 5 going to 1, just to do it again. So measure 32 has C, C, G, B flat, E. If you put that in a normal order, you get C, E, G, B flat, which is our C7 chord, not C major 7, because that would be the B natural. C7, whenever we see C7, we have to assume it's the 5 chord. It's the 5 chord of what? It's the 5 chord of F. So like I said, he went through this whole journey. He did the 5-7 of F earlier. He got to F. He got away from F, did 8 measures of 5 just to do it again and resolve it to the wrong chord. He resolved it to the C chord, but it was the wrong C chord. Now we have to go to F again. Only 3 chords left to analyze. Measure 33, the upper notes look like an F chord, but the bottom bass notes are just a C. This is kind of that idea earlier, standing on the dominant. We stood on the 5 chord, the left hand refused to get off G. Well, now the left hand's like, nah, we resolved to C. We're gonna be stuck on C. C is the last note. It's over now. This is the end. Even though the right hand's like, we're gonna play a 4 chord. We're gonna play an F major chord, which is 4. Kind of imply maybe D minor with a 2 chord there at the end, but no, the left hand's like, I really want a C chord. And then the second to last measure of the piece, we get a G7 chord. Now it's more broken up, but the notes here are still G7, B, G, B, D, F. We get a G7 chord, straight up G7 chord. And it goes to a C chord, which G7 should go to C, 5-7 should go to C, but the bottom note's still like, nah, this is all C. So Bach really at the end here, the last 10 measures, takes us for kind of a spin. He says, we're going to do 8 measures of 5. At the end of those 8 measures of 5, we're going to resolve it to a 1, but it's going to be the wrong 1 chord, and that wrong 1 chord is going to take us to 4, and then back to 5, and back to 1, but the bass is just going to be on 1 the whole time. So the bass is kind of not cooperating with the rest of the piece. I'm going to play the end here, this resolution. I'm going to play the final 5 chord, 5 measures from the end, resolve to that 1 chord that's wrong, and then has to go to the next 3 chords. And try to listen to the bass, how the bass is on 5, it goes to 1, and even though a few things happen at the end, the lowest note never really leaves 1. It's like, no, we made it. We made it home, and I'm going to stay on C. And in case it wasn't clear, that final chord, C, C, E, G, C, put that in a normal order, stack of thirds, is a C chord, C, E, G. So we end it on our 1, which is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to get back to a 1 chord at the end. I'm going to play through the whole thing, and while I do, I'm going to put the Roman numeral analysis up here. I want you to think while you're hearing it, okay, this is a 2 chord. The 2 chords should go to 5, 5 should go to 1. Try to remember some of this stuff. Okay, this is our sequence. It's just going to walk down until we get back to our C chord. This is our standing on the dominant. And see how in a way it shortens the piece for you. It's no longer this big piece of 35 measures, but it's just 5 or 6 simple progressions. If you found this video helpful, I just want to ask that you share it with someone else. It's been an absolute marathon to film this thing tonight, and I'm sure it's going to be a monster to edit, so I just love it to reach as many ears as possible. If you're going to play Prelude in C or another piece, but you're a little worried about the difficulty or complexity, I actually filmed an entire video where I just give you a whole bunch of practice tips so you can get more done in less time, how to practice more efficiently. And that video is right there for you to go check out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.